Well, thank you for joining us for Tuesday's aviation segment. Up first, flying weather graphic for tomorrow morning. 3 areas of IFR, nothing too serious here along the central and western Arctic coast down into the Chukchi Sea there, southeastern Chukchi Sea, just north of the strait. Another narrow band out here with a disturbance over the western Aleutians. And then with the storminess in the Gulf of Alaska, IFR in that area, and a piece of that breaking off, moving up to the eastern North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR for the Panhandle, marginal for Kodiak Island, and across the Pribilof Islands here over the southeastern Bering Sea. A lot of VFR in the interior. And then for the afternoon, IFR here in a narrow band there from the eastern Arctic coast back in toward Anaktuvik-Atigun Pass, and then a fair amount of IFR now over the eastern interior. But central part of the state out to the Seward Peninsula from about the Noatak Valley down into the Yukon Delta, VFR, including Nunivak Island, marginal for Kuskokwim Bay, eastward to Dillingham and in toward King Salmon and Bristol Bay there along the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula with VFR here for the central eastern Aleutians up the south coast of the peninsula into Shelikof Strait, and then out to the west, just marginal VFR from Amchitka Island westward, probably to the Komodorskis. And from there for Thursday morning, IFR reappears out here to the west, covering Adak to about Amchitka Island, and then up to the north there, just east of Shimianatu. A good zone of VFR here over the central Bering Sea that extends down to the eastern Aleutians, and then some marginal VFR here, eastern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island on down to the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula with continued VFR there on the south side, Bristol Bay VFR, Kodiak VFR, IFR up here over the eastern Arctic coast and the Brooks Range area extending down into the Yukon Valley, or I'm sorry, the Koyukuk Valley there, almost to the Yukon River there on the southern edge there though. And then some IFR here over the western Copper River Basin from south side of the Alaska Range through the Talkeetnas and down, looks like across Turnagain Arm, Whittier, Portage, maybe Girdwood, and into Resurrection Bay, IFR for the eastern North Gulf Coast, and pretty widespread over the central and eastern Gulf of Alaska, right up to the coastline of the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, that vanishes, leaving behind marginal VFR for the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, Northern Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, VFR, Madanuska Valley, marginal, and back to some VFR for the Copper River Basin, and then lower conditions along the Alaska Range here, but north of the mountains, VFR, right on up to the Brooks Range, Kobuk Valley, marginal VFR, but IFR here for the north slope out to the Arctic coast, a narrow band here along the southwest coast. Not too bad. VFR for the Pribilof Islands, St. Matthew Island, right on down there to Nikolsky, Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, looking good for the afternoon. Some marginal VFR, but still not too bad for Adak and Atka. And then back to VFR west of Kiska Island. For the passes, Anaktuvik and Atigun, occasional IFR tomorrow at some point in the day. Probably see some IFR flying conditions there, especially in the afternoon for both Adak and Atka. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR. Good VFR forecast for rainy as well as windy. Isabel, marginal VFR with VFR in the southern entrance. And for Mentasta, possible marginal VFR up here on the north side. Otherwise, pretty good VFR there, especially to the south. And for Tanita, occasional marginal VFR. Portage, marginal VFR, possible IFR in the eastern entrance. And for Chilkoot and White, IFR at times. And for the freezing levels here, 2,000 feet south of the Aleutians for the most part, and then coming back up there through Shelikof Strait and into the southern Susitna Valley, North Gulf Coast, right across Lynn Canal, 4,000 to 6,000 feet over the southern southeast coast. And from there, taking a look at the icing graphic, with the storminess here coming up, we've got considerable moderate rime icing forecasts from around Cordova eastward and then southeastward there across the southeast coast, with some lighter icing potential here back into Kodiak Island. Also could be some icing of the isolated moderate variety rime or mix there along the Yukon Flats and maybe a little bit there for the Central Brooks Range, along the Alaska Peninsula, and also out from Adak Island to Shemya and Attu. And from there, looking at the jet stream, a broad area of low pressure here at 33,000 feet, Kodiak Island, all the way back into the Russian Far East. That's keeping the jet suppressed south of the Aleutians there, just barely on the chart. The westerlies at 175 knots. Otherwise, 65 knot westerlies here just along or south, mainly just south of the Aleutian chain. And light winds into Kodiak Island with that low. And then the jet kind of reappearing here, 125 knots. We're staying well to the south. Otherwise, you can see pretty light wind flow here across the Panhandle, but much stronger in over Western Canada. And for 9,000 feet, southeast winds 45 knots along the southeast coast, even stronger here for the North Gulf Coast. Southeast at 65 knots, turning northeast at 40 knots across the southern Kenai Peninsula. And out to the west here, we've got northerlies up to 40 knots here coming from Nunivak Island down toward the Pribilofs, diminishing to 35 knots over the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. And then some 35 to 40 5-knot winds across the Aleutian chain. And for 3,000 feet, a low way back out here to the west, brings some westerlies, maybe up to 30 to 40 knots for the Aleutians, but again, stronger winds to the south. And then north to, actually northeast here at 40 knots there along the western Arctic coast, turn northerly across eastern Bering Sea and the west coast here at about 40 knots, and then north to northwest at 40 knots across the Alaska Peninsula. Strongest winds here with the storminess coming into the Bering, from the storminess coming into the Gulf of Alaska and then pulling westward here. Here's the first low, the next one down there to the south. So 50-knot winds along the central and north coast of the Panhandle. 65-knot east-southeasterlies here for the North Gulf Coast, blowing into Prince William Sound and abruptly dropping off here as it moves inland. And for the turbulence, we'll look at quite an area of considerable moderate turbulence forecast for all of the southeast coast, North Gulf Coast, in across Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, across the Barren Islands to Fognak Island. And then with those northwest winds there, northerly winds, we've got considerable moderate turbulence forecast for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, for the northwest coast, and the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline there. But pretty smooth on out to the west.